Cool. Yeah, thank you everybody for hopping on for the talk tonight. So if you aren't familiar with the little blurb in the meetup event, so this project was something I did earlier this year, where basically I have a message board that I'm a member of. It's sort of a long-running message board where I decided to basically implement a bunch of automated bots to go in and simulate other pre-existing users and to use basically uh, I'm like machine learning algorithms to be able to simulate their posts based on their existing post history. So yeah, I guess I'll start off. I have a little slide just about me. So, as mentioned, I'm the data engineer at Simply Analytics. What we do there is we're a small software as a service platform for data analytics and visualization. So, we were talking a little bit about like data warehousing earlier in the call. That's basically what I do. Most of our value add in Simply Analytics is to have sort of this massive repository of data going back, decades essentially, for all manner of like demographic variables and consumer behavior type data. And then we package it all up in sort of an easy to use application where you can search based on like category, text, whatever, switch your years, you can compare and contrast things, run different types of analyses. So I'm basically in charge of the data side of all of that. So I do the process automation, the ETL, do the infrastructure. We do a little bit of like data modeling type stuff, which that's more of like an R&D thing that we're just starting to kind of get into. But yeah, that was all experience that I was able to really draw on for this project. But yeah, for just personal projects, usually I spend a lot more time doing like self-hosted type services. So a really big like passion area for me is the federated decentralized web, which if you haven't looked into any of that, it's like super fascinating. So really cool stuff. And then yeah, we talked a little bit about game development earlier. I like game development. I admittedly have never shipped an actual game, finished it, but I do enjoy it. And yeah, I do a little bit of like home automation type stuff as well. So as far as the actual project goes, the whole like initial motivation was just sort of sitting around and realizing I had like, all of this like chat history for myself, going back from when I like, started on the internet effectively, and was kind of curious about the idea of like creating a bot based on that accumulated history, and seeing if I could get it to like sort of simulate me. And so if any of you are Black Mirror fans, there's actually an episode about that same sort of thing where they did their usual Black Mirror thing and made it like a super like dark, edgy version of it. So in that episode, it's like a woman like loses her spouse, and then there's a company that goes through his like Facebook page or whatever and makes like an AI. So same sort of idea. I didn't really go that dark. It's not like I watched that and was like, oh, awesome, like that's super cool or whatever. But it's kind of an interesting like philosophical take on it, I guess, a little bit. So I have all of this like input data or whatever that I was looking at to just just sort of playing around with it, trying to figure out like what could be my inputs or whatever. But then there's one particular source of just a lot of history for my posting online, and it was a message board. It's actually a message board that Scott and I both go to. It's called Eyes on Final Fantasy. So the slide has some screenshots from various like Final Fantasy games. So Eyes on Final Fantasy in particular is just a message board, video game fan community, been around for since like 99 basically, and I've in particular been there since I was like 11 years old, and I'm 31 now, so obviously I've been there for quite some time. And if you're not familiar with Final Fantasy, it's a video game series, Japanese RPG game. Doesn't have like super common like name recognition. It's not like a Fortnite or whatever, but they do still sell a lot of copies. They actually just released the one in the bottom right, came out in like March and sold like a bajillion copies or whatever. So still fairly popular. But nowadays you don't really have like video game fan sites quite as much. But back then, for a long time before your Facebooks and your Twitter and Reddit and all that, if someone wanted to make like a fan community, they had to go through the effort of actually standing up a website on their own and trying to like accumulate as many resources as they could to draw people in, and having like message boards and chat, which was like the thing at the time if you wanted to talk about this stuff online. So Eyes on Final Fantasy had all of that, and in particular early on, Final Fantasy games are still coming out like every year, so there's always like something to talk about. Now like game budgets are just so much bigger and they take so much longer to produce. There's not as much buzz, so the message board has slowed down quite a bit. But the thing about the community is that it is really tight knit. It's a lot of really great people, super cool. I mean, there are people on there who've like gotten married and have kids. Like literally, the current owner of the site met his wife there. They have kids now, and then they're playing Final Fantasy and like posting about it. So it's pretty cool. And so for me being like, oh, okay, could I like scrape all of this history of everybody's posts? It was like, well, I could do this here because it's not super active. Everybody's cool, and nobody's gonna be like super bothered that I'm doing this weird little thing. So yeah, I basically went through the thought process of all of this information is there, but it's like if I'm gonna go through the process of just dumping all of my own personal data, it's like just as much work to just dump everything. And then it's like, if I'm just dumping everything, why just simulate my own posts? And so you kind of see like the thread going through here just sort of started out like, oh, just a small little thing, and then kind of turned into something bigger. So yeah, I was going to go a little bit into the history of bots a little bit, and so full disclosure, there's a little bit of filler here just because I wanted to do a real like live demo, but essentially what this project ends up doing is it makes like a spam bot using computer generated text, and I felt a little weird about using a spam bot in like a live, sort of like a presentation type thing, and then also the text generation, even though like Eyes on Final Fantasy is a very PG-13 type website. Like whenever you're doing like arbitrary text generation, you don't know what you're going to get out. So in the interest of trying to keep things sort of like, yeah, a little bit like more squeaky clean, I just decided we won't do a demo, but I do have like screenshots of like some of the output and stuff. So anyways, I just wanted to start off talking a little bit about bots specifically, the whole like concept. So if you're not familiar, I think there's a lot of like descriptions out there and a lot of like niche specialized applications for bots or whatever, but like sort of the most fundamental description would be just like a program that's trying to interact with you as though it's like sort of a real person on the other side or whatever. It's supposed to simulate like a very like human type of interaction. And so if you look back in sort of the Wayback Machine of computer science history, one of the earliest and still kind of like most famous bot type programs was actually ELIZA. That was created back in the 60s. And the idea there was to simulate psychotherapy using a really simple sort of like input-output mechanism where, ELIZA would just ask you a question and you would answer, and then it would take your input and try and form a question out of it. So for, I guess this doesn't have like a great example in the screenshot, but it might be like, if you said like, oh, I'm just really upset today, I might say, well, why are you upset today? And, supposedly the folklore behind ELIZA is that, people saw it as actually being, really helpful for, they felt psychologically better after interacting with it. I mean, I don't know how much any of that is true. I don't think that I would trust my mental health with it necessarily, but that was, again, part of what people said and what part of the legend of ELIZA. So, this concept obviously is like, it's not super complicated and it's been around for a long time, but I think what really started to make things take off was whenever you got into something like IRC or really any sort of like, protocol or API based like communication bus. And so if any of you ever, did IRC, like back in the day, that was the thing. Like everybody had bots for everything. You could automate basically any kind of service you wanted to do. You could have it play games. You could have it be like an auto moderator and see if somebody is like spamming your channel, like can it like automatically kick or whatever. So it really like blew up, and it was really just limited by people's imagination in terms of what they could implement. And so, back then it was just sort of like, well, we want to like tie together these sort of like bot-like interactions with this IRC protocol. But now for the more modern chat services, it's even like sort of a first-class citizen being able to have like bots on there. So if any of you use something like a Discord or a Slack or whatever, they actually offer explicit things where you can go on and register like an API key, and they expose all these different actions that you can do to implement your own bots. So, it's really come quite a long way from the ELIZA of the 60s to being something that is just sort of kind of expected. So the thing that, I actually ended up doing was sort of reverse engineering the API for the message board software, which I talk about a little bit later. And that's sort of the other way to do it. You don't necessarily have to be given like explicit keys to the kingdom, but if you're reverse engineering it, it's usually because you don't. It's not necessarily something that the API provider wants you to do. So that's the origin of like spam bots and things like that. And this is a little slide I put together just because this is it's something I'm really interested in from a security research perspective, and sort of a topic on the broader like social media landscapes. This is the bot PSA. So, when you look at social media, bots are pretty much everywhere, whether or not you realize it. And what's sort of like the creepy, like dystopian cyberpunk thing is that there are these like active attempts to use bots for the sake of message amplification in order to like influence the public discourse. So, you can imagine back in the day, it would have been like, oh, you just have a bot for, just posting spam leaks for whatever thing, like, fake like Rolex watches or whatever. But now it's more like, people have realized it's very cheap to do these sort of like psychological operations to like come up with a message that will confirm people's biases, and then you use what are referred to as these sock puppet accounts, which are essentially bots designed to look like real users on there. And they're designed down to sort of this like psychographic level to look like people you would actually be really talking to. And then whenever they're amplifying a message that, again, further confirms your biases, even if it's completely not accurate, it's very easy for people to fall into the trap of just sort of like integrating that piece of information. So, this is just kind of the reality, the brave new world that we're in with social media. Again, like it's the social media companies, they're trying to stay ahead of the game on this, but there's only so much you can do whenever you have someone who's sufficiently motivated to keep in front of this. So I think, the biggest thing that I think, I want the takeaway to be from this is that, as an information consumer, just make sure you're always diligent. Make sure you're looking out for obvious troll and obvious bot accounts. It's an election year, so this is going to be like far worse than it would be normally. So yeah, just be careful out there. So yeah, with kind of all of that background out of the way, and get into some of the methodology bits. Just one second. So, the first thing I had to do in order to build all this project up was to do the data scraping to get the actual information to build any of the language models. And I'm not a legit hacker. I don't do that kind of stuff. I don't socially engineer my way onto servers. So I don't have access directly to the actual database that the message board software is running on. So I had to take the alternative approach of sort of brute forcing that and doing just data scraping. So in order to do that, I used a framework that is written in Python called Scrapey. This is really easy to use. It's a very popular tool. And what Scrapey does is it's not like a standard Python module where you like import it into your code and then you extend the classes or whatever. It's more like you write your code to be run within the framework of the Scrapey tool. And you give it a bunch of rules for how it's going to follow links and recursively search through the entire site. So you could tell it like keep following links and parse each page and go until you hit a stop condition, which you kind of have to be a little bit careful about because you don't want it to just click anything arbitrary and keep like traversing it recursively, and then before you know, you have an entire copy of the internet on your hard drive. So yeah, and then the other thing that it'll do is it actually it downloads the entire website and then gives you basically a document object model thing that you can extract out using CSS selectors. So one of the advantages of, one of the nice things about Eyes on Final Fantasy is that it's using vBulletin 4, which is a commercial message board software that is super out of date right now. I don't know when it was last updated, but I know it's been like end of life for like years now. So when you think about, your modern single site applications, when everything's implemented in JavaScript and it's very dynamic and you're using asynchronous requests or maybe even like WebSockets or something to do this communication and have the page be very reactive. With this, it's using just server-side page rendering. It's pulling, you send a request to the server, the PHP code is invoked, it's pulling everything from the database and then sending you some static HTML, which makes it really easy to crawl because you don't have to like simulate anything in order to get the JavaScript into a right state to get the pieces you want. It's just kind of all right there. So to get the bits out that I was interested in, I just had to do like a basic DOM inspection. So pull up the inspector, go through, see, okay, like the post is in this, and a, HTML tag with this label or whatever, and then pull it out. And then you put it into like a little object. And yeah, just had the Scrapey the Scrapey tool dump all of this into a giant JSON file. It ended up being 425 megs, so it's a little bit of a beast to deal with, but it didn't have to be anything fancy. So you can see on the left-hand side, there's sort of an example of what the JSON objects look like. It just pulls out sort of the the high-level information that I needed for this. So to actually work with it, I wasn't going to work with a 425 meg JSON file. This is going to be a nightmare. So I did put everything into a database, and you can kind of see a picture of what the schema ended up looking like. I had like just a local Postgres database on my machine that I stood up. Postgres is what I use for work. It's, it just sort of makes things like this easy to use something that you're familiar with. The schemas, it was really simple, normalized. So again, as you can see, there's a table for users, table for threads, and then a table for posts, the foreign keys into those. So you can build everything up, kind of slice and dice based on whatever information you want. I did also try to include like timestamps, so you could slice things down with that, but that didn't really play into it. But, in theory, if you wanted to model a particular person in a particular year of their life, that could be useful for that. So yeah, the actual like parsing and data model or data transformation bit to get it in there is about 50 lines of code. It was really simple. I think the biggest thing I had to do was find a JSON library for Python that could actually handle a JSON file that large. So there's like one called Big JSON that does some sort of memory paging to swap things out. So it adds a little bit of overhead, but it really wasn't that big of a deal. Yeah, so once I had all of that, I mean, it was more or less just a local backup of the entire forums, which, there's a lot more to the forums. There's a lot more like user details or whatever, but I didn't really care. I didn't really need anything like that. So yeah, the next piece is basically talking about the language model that I use for the text generation. For the sake of simplicity, I just went with Markov chains. They're very simple. I'm not super math heavy theoretical type of guy, so I'm not like intimately familiar with Markov chains, but at this like very high level, you're basically modeling things as a state machine. So this picture, I took this off Wikipedia. This is the model for an animal that eats grapes or can eat lettuce or can eat cheese. And then basically the percentages there define what the probabilities are for a given state to transition to another state. So when you look at the arrows, you see like for eat grapes, there's a 10% chance you'll go from eating grapes to still eating grapes, and then a 50% chance of going to eating lettuce, and then a 40% chance of going to eating cheese. So like let's say you started off at the eat grapes bit, and you rolled a 10-sided die. If you got a 1, maybe that means that you go back to eating grapes. If you get a 4 through 5, maybe that means that you go to eating cheese, and so on and so forth. And then whenever you transition to the next state, you roll the dice again, and you see where you go. And then after so many iterations, you can look at the chain of how everything proceeded. And so it's sort of like an interesting sort of theoretical thing, but it's also pretty interesting to do with text. I mean, you can think about the text data set being a corpus is what they call it. So if you do like a frequency analysis in your corpus and figure out what words appear together most frequently, you can find out the transition probability of, like, say you have a sentence that starts with the word the, what are you most likely to go to the next time? And then once you have that model built up, you can do the same thing of say, like, build me a sentence with 20 words and start with the word like the, and then maybe it'll pick the next word is sky, and then like so on and so forth. So there's no real like context of what the sentence says from bit to bit. There's only probabilities of what the next word is going to be. And so that the nice thing about Markov chains is they're very, very computationally simple, but as you might imagine, they're like terrible for serious text generation. If you want to do anything with that, you really want to get into the space of artificial neural networks, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end. But they're pretty hilarious for the sake of hobby projects. So yeah, this is an example of a Markov chain output. So heck, chemistry humor, a mole of posts, and I like the idiots on this tonight, and hopefully have it up attempted number 3. No idea what the question directly tells you everything you need to fit 36 pygmy elephants into a container. So that was actually from Scott's post history that I generated that one. So yeah, just random. So the module that I use to do the Markov chains was called Markovify, and it really does all the work. Like I'm not a theoretical guy. I don't, understand the specifics of how Markov chains work, but yeah, with this library, you really don't need to. And so, once I had the database built up and had sort of the Markovify thing put together, it became very easy to just throw a parameter to the script to say, okay, select this user's post history, build a language model, build a post from that. And the nice thing about Markovify is it can be parameterized. You can give it like start conditions, length, whatever. So there's a lot of stuff you can tweak there. I mean, you're only ever going to take a Markov chain so far in making it, like a legitimate like language model. But, they give you a little bit of leeway to sort of do your own thing with it. So yeah, and I guess the last sort of like unknown here for me was reverse engineering vBulletin 4. So as I mentioned before, it's pretty outdated. There's basically like no spam bot protection whatsoever in that. So what I ended up doing was just using curl. It's just a network tool for sending requests across the network. You can format them however you want. And it was really pretty straightforward to just sort of do, again, going into the inspector, hitting the network tab and seeing like, oh, okay, so to make a post, I have to extract this token and put it here or whatever. But again, no bot prevention whatsoever. I think if there had actually been a CAPTCHA, I probably wouldn't have proceeded with this project because I'm kind of lazy like that. But the fact that it was just sort of an open door to go through was sort of nice. And one of the goals I had with this was also to, not only simulate users, but I kind of wanted to cover my trails a little bit. So I did try to proxy all of the requests over Tor, which, you know, I won't go into detail on like how Tor works or whatever, but it's, you know, it's just sort of a proxy effectively that just spits you out somewhere random on the internet. And it turns out that curl sort of just interacts with Tor really well. I mean, it's not surprising that Tor is made to be very, very easy. So yeah, that wasn't really that big of a deal. And so, yeah, once I had all that stuff together, you know, I had to start making the accounts. This was a part that was actually a very like manual process. So, you know, I had to do it over Tor again to kind of like mask my identity a little bit. I had to use disposable email addresses. So there's various websites on the internet that give you like burner email addresses. So this was kind of like where it would always go from being like really fun and really like rapid fire to just sort of coming to a screeching halt, because I was just like, okay, click here, fill this in, put a password in, send the confirmation email, wait for the confirmation email, click the confirmation, you know, and all that stuff. So that always took a while. And then I did try to add a little bit of like flavor to the accounts to link them back to the original user. So I would download their avatar and just make an altered version of it to put up there. And then there was a little bit of internal accounting that I did. So to actually keep track of what bot user corresponded to the real user, I just had like a spreadsheet, and that was mainly required because all of the bot names were like puns. They weren't like programmatic, like, you know, take the real name underscore bot or whatever. I was trying to do like funny little like robot based puns to yeah, keep it interesting. So yeah, and then yeah, this is how it got going. I got it all to work. This is Looney Bot, who is the bot version of Looney Bob, the previous owner of the website. Yeah, he just sort of rambles incoherently. I don't mind if some posts are displayed. The most interesting, number 48 and number 49, was MLTB Calvin and MLTB Hobbs. And yeah, just complete random nonsense that just came up out of the blue. And yeah, sorry, this Zoom thing is making it hard for me to see this. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the process was really more of a manual thing to start out, where I you know, I had the script to generate the text and the script to post, and I tried to sort of like curate the pieces, and I didn't want to just like, you know, unload the like low orbit ion cannon on them or whatever. So but the initial response was amused. A lot of people were confused. You could see Looney Bob was like, I have many questions, but also only one. What? So and people were just sort of, you know, having fun with it, like, who the hell is actually doing this? Like, what is actually going on here? And here's some screenshots of sort of what was actually happening. So Cybotic, he's a bot version of an administrator named Psychotic. Sin Looney Bob is the single most awesome thing of all EOF, and it has Lindsay Lohan in it, and stop hijacking this thread. Anyway, you're in this thread. And Shauna, a real user, thought that the bots have become very smart. And then here's more gibberish. Working forward, if you have another fight over the next person answers and types the next US meeting and we have problems, we need some taters. Shinks had a really like delicious sounding recipe of my grandma's making spaghetti with meatballs and Italian sausage with fennel pickle, and yes, ketchup, Italian sausage, and hot dogs are Yorkies and Dachshunds. I don't have to pick them out. Then put his bra in the fridge before you due date. Freya had a little pun there. Stranger, no, you. Oh my God, your mom joke, but I'll hold back for date night. And Psychotic quoted one of the bots saying, "You say tomato, I say Salt Lake City, Utah." I still don't think he's gotten that on a T-shirt yet, though. So yeah, at this point, again, the text generation was all scripted. But I was still kind of passing everything in manually, saying, oh, I want to do this user, do a couple iterations, find the stuff that was actually kind of funny. And then once I had curated that piece, I would go and pass it to a separate script that then would log in and post as that user. But again, all very manual. So, you know, my next thing was, well, why can't it all be completely automated? Um, so yeah, I started to put together this little script, and this is basically all of the magic of what ended up being the final major blast of bot attack. Um, so the chainer module, that was just the Markov chain bit. The poster module, that was the bit that used curl to take messages and post them. I implemented a random pick function that would just go through and pick a random bot out of the list of registered bots, and just make sure it wasn't repeating them. So it would always inspect the last two and say, okay, when you pick something, make sure you're not picking one out of the last two. And then, yeah, once it picked a bot, it just generated some text and sent it out, and I could pass it the command line. Okay, do this for X amount of iterations. So yeah, started with one run. It was successful. It seemed fine. So I just upped it to 25, thought, maybe the server will start to fall over or throttle me or something, and nothing happened. Then 50, and then 500 was sort of the final one. Just sort of let it run, and yeah, then I don't know what I expected, but I did end up with 7 pages of bots saying absolute nonsense. So this is a nice little screenshot of that. I mean, this, again, 7 pages of just complete random, like, nonsensical stuff. So it's hard to pick out like any particular highlights. I did kind of like the one here at the bottom with Gold Lena. When you boot up your router setup /admin page, and also recognizes the Nintendo 64 for the slush puppies lack of GIF. So here's a still with a very yeah. So yeah, this is a screenshot of Psychotic, the admin. You saw him simulated earlier. He was trying to figure out who this actually was, and eventually I did, after just sort of blasting them for a while, I did let everybody in on the joke. I wrote up a little blog post. If anybody's ever interested in reading that, I can send the link around. And he was the only person who actually guessed my identity throughout the whole thing. He did say, I have a hunch that a certain former SIDS Knight is responsible because this seems very much his style, STU. So that was sort of the key. He was like, oh, it's Stu, that's the guy. So, but otherwise, yeah, people didn't really seem to guess who it was. But sort of, as expected, people in this situation, they just saw that bots were coming in and impersonating people, and they seemed to just want to see kind of what happened whenever the bots got a hold of their post history. So, everyone seemed to have a pretty good time. No harm, no foul. So yeah, that's sort of it. Sort of an unceremonious end to it. Is really just something I kind of did to mess around for a little bit. If you're interested in making your own, though, Markovify would be the place to start. So that's, again, a very simple Python library, does all of the work of actually doing the Markov chains. Generating a text corpus is probably going to be the thing that takes you the most time, but anything you can put, any source of text that you can put into some sort of structured format and then feed into the Markovify library in order to generate a model, you're going to get something. It may not be awesome, but you're going to get something. And yeah, then at that point, as mentioned earlier, there's all sorts of like APIs that you can hook this stuff up to. It's not uncommon for people to put Markov chain bots on Twitter. I'm sure you've probably seen some by now. And they have lots of examples of the sort of stuff on the Markovify GitHub. So you see they have like a Reddit simulator. You can, there's one where they take Star Trek: The Next Generation transcripts and turn them into, Twitter, or into a Twitter bot. So there's all kinds of fun stuff you can do. If I were to pick this back up again and take it further, or if anybody out there wanted to do something like this and take it further, I think the next step would really be to look into artificial neural networks. I spent a little bit of time with this, but they're pretty intense. I mean, AI is a huge field for good reason. I don't really want to pretend to be an expert in neural networks, but basically what you're doing is you are actually trying to simulate the firing of synapses in a brain in order to teach a program to do something. And you have like your training data set, and it's going to try and match the training data set. So, where Markov chains are very computationally simple, these are super computationally intense. A lot of times you want to like offload some of the processing onto like a GPU, and even then you may be letting that GPU program run for like a day or something. That was sort of my experience, and I still got really crappy results. So I was like, okay, whatever. Markov chains are good enough. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of literature out there on the internet that shows that neural networks can generate like sort of like freakishly good text, like simulating human beings. So yeah, if you're curious, just Google around, see there's all sorts of like cool new models coming out for that. Another thing I thought would be kind of cool if you really wanted to make this, I don't know, like interesting, is make all of the bots more like agents. They use this sort of model in video games a lot for video game AI. You treat each of the enemies or whatever as agents, and you sort of have them react to one another and understand that like they're receiving some sort of stimulus and that they should change their behavior in a certain way. So I think in theory, there's no reason you couldn't do that. You would have to sort of improve what you're doing to pull, information down. You'd have to be able to contextualize it a little bit, but you could have them actually, talk to one another or try and engage with like a real human being if they're able to extract the right pieces of information to be able to respond. And of course, the other thing you could do is deploy this on a remote server and have some sort of long-running process. You could implement like a basic control panel or something like that. Increase the pace at which things are posted, or reduce it, or add some sort of like entropy parameter or something. Python typically makes it pretty easy to set up some sort of like web-based interface. So that's sort of a, not really a necessary thing, but like a logical next step if you wanted to really make this fancy. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the actual technical bits. So just to close it out, the project was a lot of fun. It spans a lot of areas of technology. And I guess the thing I would say is that it's fairly straightforward for the amount of stuff you have to like tie together to get everything to work. None of it is like super intense or super involved or whatever. I mean, all the Python stuff, like you import a module, you read the documentation on how to instantiate some object, and then you run your script. I mean, that's it. So if you are someone who, maybe is a little bit earlier in your experience level or whatever, and you want to learn about a lot of stuff and, have a kind of a fun project to tie it all together, I would absolutely recommend something like this. Between the data scraping, the API reverse engineering, the machine learning bits, yeah, there's just a lot of stuff you can take away from this. And yeah, the last thing is I find that I really like simple projects where you get to kind of like entertain your friends. It's always like a really good motivation to do something to get some sort of reaction. So yeah, and again, everyone seemed to have a good time. It's a good group of people there. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one. Do you think it would have been, you would be able to find the easier way? You said that the you had to do a manual process for registering the bots. If you had the time, would you have tried to find an automated way to do that, like a script?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it wouldn't have been that difficult because again, it's all just network inspection type stuff, figuring out what parameters you need to send in there. So, for me, it was like I was spending so much effort on just trying to get the posting working and stuff that like registration was, you do it once and then you can reuse the same bot over and over and over again. But I think there's, no reason you couldn't take the exact same technique and expand it out to being able to automate the registration. I think the only tricky bit would be for the email. For like the burner email services, they're all very like visual based. They set this stuff up because they know, like, if you're going to like register for some website to get beyond like a paywall or whatever, that's all you want to use it for. It's not really designed to be sort of programmatically accessed like that. So that would be a bit you would have to overcome. I'm sure there are like really clever like scam or spammers out there who have figured out like efficient ways to do that. I just didn't really look that far into it. But yeah, I mean, if you did that, I think that you could really get dangerous. I think at that point, if
Yeah.
you could just like register any amount of bots arbitrarily.
That's why I'm kind of asking, because the amount of bots I've seen in Instagram and Twitter, like I don't go on like that, but it's literally insane. It's like every single comment is a bot.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's sort of the thing. I mean, I had that like bot PSA thing, and the reason I think a lot of this happens is because you do have, I mean, like anything with computer security, you just need someone who is sufficiently motivated to figure out a way to work around your system. I don't think that your Twitters and your Facebooks or anything like that are ever going to be able to have a foolproof system of working around this, because the APIs that these bot writers are exploiting, it's the same APIs that a legitimate user is going to use. So if you increase the requirements for the bots to be able to do it, you're also in theory increasing the requirements for a standard user. And if you make it too restrictive, a normal user isn't going to want to use it. So it's a delicate place, but it's also like, I don't know, it's such a difficult problem to solve. I don't really know how you solve it. I think they are pretty good at getting rid of the low hanging fruit at the very least, but then again, it's all you need is the sufficiently motivated actor to really decide they want to take it to the next level and have that sort of automated script. So yeah, it's it's a crazy situation. I mean, it's a very 2020 thing, just being like, oh, okay, so most of the conversation I'm engaging with on Twitter is simulated, I guess, artificial people. I don't know. So yeah, it's weird.
If you're not too worried about it being traced back to you, I wonder if it would be simple enough to use the plus operator in Gmail accounts. So a not well-known fact about Gmail accounts is that you can type in your email plus whatever you want at something at gmail.com. It'd be interesting if you could use your script to just say, oh, here's the email address that I'll let you catch me on, plus like the bot number, the bot username.
Yeah.
Like if you're not too worried about them catching you, like if it's a kind of fun thing, then
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think, I don't know, I think I was honestly a little bit too lazy to even make a Gmail account. Like the disposable services, I don't even remember the names of them now, but it's like you go on, you click a button, you get email address, where like Gmail, you have to like, I don't know, do crazy things like put a real name in or, whatever. Like they try to sort of validate that you're a real human being. But yeah, no, the plus operator is really great. I actually use that for work. We use it for just sort of like integration testing in order to avoid having like duplicate emails getting bounced. But yeah, I mean, I think it all depends on sort of what your application is for what you're doing. Like again, if you're talking about like scaling this up to be like a legitimate like Twitter bot or something, like that's going to get caught probably immediately. But yeah, you're absolutely right. In this case, it probably would have been, even a little bit more efficient just to have something that could just log into a Gmail account, check the, pop email or inbox or whatever, and yeah, just go from there.
Other questions?
I guess I could say thank you for bringing Markov chains back into my life. I had to study them in length for like a year and a half, to the point that we had to draw out some super crazy chains that took up like 3 full-size chalkboards.
Oh wow!
So I've been in one of Eva's classrooms, and like we would have filled the wall of the chalkboard with the size of the Markov chain that we were doing. And I was so happy to have never thought of it again until I saw that one.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot better when you have the software take care of it for you, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very cool. What was the application for that?
So we started off, the whole thing was like a theory of computing. So it starts off with just here's how the system processes into a compiler, and then it built up to a compiler course where you need to build the Markov chain to prove that your compiler shouldn't break at any point.
Oh, wow. Okay. So was it just sort of trying to generate like input for the like random input for the compiler?
No, it was the state machine of the compiler. So based on what character you're currently looking at, if you see this character, then you can move on to the next state. So basically, it's like if you're looking at a data type, the next thing that you see should map out to be a variable name, and then the next thing should be an assignment operator or something like that.
Okay.
So those were the ones that got really big and really nasty.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my God. That's super cool though. Yeah, I guess I guess there's some legitimate applications for Markov chains besides just making Twitter bots, but yeah. that sounds rough. Cool. Yeah, anything else from anybody?
We have
I
other
just want to say
questions.
thanks. I just want to say thanks. I have to drop and feed the girls. They're grumpy. But thank you guys. If we have any more of these, I'm definitely going to join because I'm a little rusty. But thank you guys and have a good evening.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay.